All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Pure Playbook. I am Dr. Dustin Dawson here with Dr. Nate and we're excited. Let's call this season 2, right?
Yeah,
so as we've kind of been going through practice and going through a busy season and a lot of good transition. And so we've put up some replays of podcasts previously, but we're going to call this season 2. We are going to continue bringing education information for student athletes and their parents that are trying to keep up with them, kind of bridge some gaps, give some good education, go over some research, go over some top things in the sports world, and also bringing back in Sam's segment. So producer Sam will have her segment as well. Super excited about this. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're definitely going to go in a route. Obviously, we have the 3 pillars of mental, physical, and relationships. So we'll start to tailor some of the podcast within each of those categories. This one today being more in the physical side of things. We're going to talk about some injury prevention and recovery tips and what should be done during those. What are some of the old mantras? What are some of the new things in the rehab and injury prevention recovery field? So that's kind of the route that we'll take today. But along those lines, we're going to push in some research, like he said. And one thing that I found interesting, and I even posted about this the other day, was that 50% of injuries in youth sports are overuse injuries. And that plays right into this where there's the recovery and prevention side of things. So if we could prevent 50% of injuries in youth sports just by doing proper recovery, then why not go down that route? And so, I mean, obviously we'd be playing longer, not be having the overuse, the stress response injuries with that kind of thing. But I found that stat pretty interesting that we could easily prevent 50% of them just by, one, educating the youth athlete and athletes in general on what they can do that they're not already doing. And then obviously if that stuff does happen, then that's what we're here for. But prevent 50% of them, that's pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, it's to prevent 50% of the 50% is a huge step in the right direction.
Right.
You can go up a little bit on my headphones still, Sam. It's kind of caught in between. Yeah, I think so. We'll keep working on it. So, and it's ironic you bring that up and you brought that to the table because last night we had a whole softball team here for a recovery night. And, you know, the recovery is so important. And I think it is something that people are looking for, like, what do we do? When do we do it? And I had a lot of great questions from 15 to 18-year-olds last night about just that. What do we do? When do we do it? When's too much? When is the best time? When is the wrong time? Is there a wrong time? And what does that look like? And so, you know, these kids nowadays are not going to be playing any less, especially when you get to a tier like we have all competed at where, you know, you get to that higher level, you get to that demanding, that competitive ball, club sports now, I guess is what they're calling it now. It used to be like AAU, used to be the big thing. And, but it's like, and at the end of the day, like these kids are built different now. Like they're developing differently and nobody's going to practice less when you get that core of club sports. It's like the old club sport practices are now the rec practices.
Yeah.
And now club sports are what college sports used to be. And now college sports are what professional sports used to be. And now professionals, well, who knows what they're doing? They're doing anything, everything, too much, too little. But it is a drastic shift. And recovery is very, very important.
Yeah, you bring up a good point that the athletes are built different nowadays. And a lot of that has to do also with how quickly they're growing at such a young age. And we could always get into why that's happening. But with them growing so quickly at a young age, let's just think about, you know, stress response injuries, which is such a common one we see, whether it's a stress fracture in the like shin splints, it's kind of the stress response.
I was just going to say, go through the diagnoses that parents would hear. You're dead
so
on.
like the stress, the shin splints is a stress response that can turn into a stress fracture. And with growth plates still being open at the adolescent age, that's more common of an injury where we can have those stress fractures at those growth plate sites, or even the insertion points of the muscles into the bone.
Osgood-Schlatters.
Yeah, Osgood-Schlatters, you know, those kind of things that we're seeing all the time. And so one of the reasons that happens at those ages, and why you don't hear it in people that are in maybe the college or even the professional realm, is because the bones are growing quicker than what the tendons and ligaments and muscles can keep up with. So that puts more tension on the insertion point, and that's why we have that stress response. So that's where the recovery comes into play, is if you're not doing recovery, you can do all the training you want and become a great athlete, but if you're not doing the right recovery stuff, then eventually your tissue is going to break down because matter has limitations, and then you're going to deal with the injury, and then you're setting yourself back from there. So,
and I think with that too, it's I think one thing that I want to get through to parents of student athletes, and I think a lot of us tend to think, here's what I want to take off the table is, oh, they're kids, you know, we got to let them just rest and be, and, you know, they'll bounce back. It's kind of like when, you know, oh, drop a baby when they're a baby, at least they're made of cartilage. And then it's like, what's the next step? It's like, then kids go into sports and it's like, oh, well, at least they're kids. And, you know, glad they're not 45 years old like me. I couldn't keep up with them. But it's like, then what are we like? It's not ideal to have to, as a parent, honestly, transparently, it's like, I've got 2 kids in hockey now. I've got 1 in dance. They're all under 7. And it's like, to think about, man, roll them out, do, you know, some sort of cryotherapy. It's not going to be the intense at that age, but it's like, you know, how do we do hot, cold? How do we do stretching? How do we do rolling out for kids that are under 10? And then you go 10 to 12 and you hit that developmental spurt, and all those hormones are going on, and not just hormones, puberty hormones, but it's like, that's a huge growth and developmental stage hormonally, which puts more pressure, more susceptibility to injuries of soft tissues. So it's like, recovery is super important at any age. And might I be so bold to say at that age?
Yeah, definitely at that age. And that's not always being taught. So we'll get into kind of 3 tips, preventional tips on what you can be doing, and I'll just run through what those tips are here. But first one's going to be warm up and cool down. You know, we'll get a little bit into that. Strength training and stability. And then the third one, rest and listen to your body. So getting into the warm up and cool down, everybody's like, you know, what do I do warm up? What do I do cool down? Based on what research shows, what you're wanting to do more so with warm-ups is going to be more of dynamic movements. That's just going to be the broad statement. We're going to be doing more dynamic movements, not as much of the static stretches, whether that would be like bending down and touching your toes and holding for 30 seconds. That's going to be more of a static stretch. We want to reserve more for like afterwards. And with what the research shows is it's not necessarily going to set you up for an injury, but doing the dynamic stretching is going to enhance your performance. And that's really what we're wanting to do when we're, you know, in the game and performing, that kind of thing. So, you know, the myth of, you know, doing the static stretch is going to, you know, cause you to have an injury, or not warming up is going to cause you to have an injury. There's some, you know, muddy waters there, but what we want to focus on is doing the dynamic stretching before, static stretching after. And that's going to be kind of what we're going to do for tip number 1.
Yeah. And one thing I said last night to these softball athletes were, a warm up should be a warm up. It's not called a stretch out.
Right. Exactly.
You don't show up to the field, court, whatever, you know, whatever it is you're playing on, or competing in, and do a stretch out.
Yeah. My brother and I we were just at Pittsburgh Steelers, a game in Indianapolis. Unfortunately, they lost. But we went down and we were watching the warm-ups. And these guys, you would think, I mean, with how much they were sweating, like a warm-up, you should be sweating by the time you're done with it. You would think if you would have saw them at the end of their warm-up that they just finished the game. And so that should be happening, and you should be doing that much to the point where you are sweating and getting the muscles and the joints and everything warmed up. But then moving on to tip number 2, to not spend too much time on each tip.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
What does a dynamic warm-up look like? You're talking about what is that? So
does this look like Sam's segment? No, I'm just
okay.
kidding.
Well,
I love the interruption.
I'm just
dynamic
curious.
warm-up, to put it in more, you know, layman's terms, is we're moving as we're stretching at the same time. So putting the joints and the muscles through a full range of motion repetitively to get the blood flowing in those areas, get that sweat going is what we're wanting. So a simple one to compare a dynamic stretch versus a static stretch for a hamstring would be a Frankenstein stretch, which a lot of people might know, where you're holding your arms out in front of you and kicking the leg up towards your hands, and you're walking and kicking at the same time. That's going to stretch out your hamstrings dynamically. Whereas the static stretch is, like I said before, you're just bending straight down. Whether you're in a seated position or standing up, and holding for 30 seconds to a minute or whatever.
This is quickly going to turn into like an active informational. Like all of a sudden, you're going to have to man the camera and watch Nate like make me do all these things.
Yeah, I'll get up and start.
Dr. Nate's going to be like, all right, let's just show you how to do it.
Yeah,
I've always wanted to be a videographer.
There you
so
go.
I'm in.
I was
Let's
just
go.
recording some stuff earlier. So
He was. That's true.
Yeah.
Some dynamic warm-ups in case anyone was wondering.
along those lines of recording some videos earlier, I'm putting some stuff into our online app where we can do some rehab protocols virtually as well as for our clients. But the strength and stability component, that's what I was recording, some stability exercises. So with that, with the recovery side of it, certain muscles are more designed to be power and strength muscles. Other muscles are designed to be more stability and endurance muscles. So those endurance and stability muscles are ones that, one, should have endurance and be able to sustain contraction and repetitive contraction over a long period of time. So that's oftentimes why we see a lot of injuries later on in the games, in overtime, those kind of things, is because those endurance muscles, they start to lose their endurance and they start to lose the stability. And for example, if we lose stability in the hip, that's going to create more valgus stress, especially at the speed of valgus, which is going to cause a lot of the knee injuries that we see in sports fields. But when we don't have that endurance stability, which is one of the things you want to focus on for a prevention tip, then we're more prone and susceptible to injuries later on. So that's where that prevention tip comes into play, is focusing on the stability muscles and making sure that those muscles have good endurance. So getting into tip number 3, rest and listen to your body. I like the second part of this a lot, is listen to your body, because you know it the best. That's one thing I think randomly my wife asked me one day, like, what's one superpower you wish you could have? And the superpower I came up with that day was, I wish I could put myself and feel someone else what they're feeling. Me being, a chiropractor, when someone's trying to explain what they're actually feeling, I can get a good feel for what it is. But if I could actually experience what they're feeling, then, I would be able to tell them exactly what to do and go down that route. So that being said, listen to your own body. You should know when it's time to recover and not push past that point. Because when you're pushing past, whether it's a parent, a coach, or whoever's telling you just go, 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 listen to your body, and then you can avoid a lot of those overuse injuries.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, and because I'll be honest with you, obviously this is all definitely not scripted, so here's something that I've always thought of when I talk about that, and one of the phrases you said, it honestly kind of gives me the ick a little bit, because I know how we mean it, but one thing that I would like to see change, and maybe we can be on the forefront of this, is listen to your body because you know it the best. No, listen to your body because you can, and it's okay not to know what the hell you should do.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you know it the best in a sense. You know how to listen to, you know what it's saying, you know what it's telling you. But also too, I really do believe, and I know you're agreeing with where I'm going with this, that there's still a lot to teach so they can learn and know their body the best. Like, this is what this means. This is what this is telling you.
You can be more in tune with yourself, and you can learn
100%.
how to be more in tune with yourself. And that's one of the things that we would want to help expose to you if you're under care or we're seeing you or working with certain athletes, is there is a little bit of a learning curve to that, to know, what feels good, what doesn't feel good. We have some clients in here that, when we put them through a stretch, they're like, is it supposed to feel that way? Is it supposed to hurt in a sense? It's like, yeah, that actually is what the stretch should feel like when we're doing that kind of thing. But yeah, listen to your body in the context that Dr. Dustin just mentioned is a great way to put it. So,
yeah. What else you got?
I think it's up. Sam's up, I think, next.
It is. Hi, guys. Welcome back. Nice to for you all to hear my voice again. Happy to be back for season 2. Maybe one day we'll see my face on camera.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's fine. So actually my segment today actually ties in to rest and recovery and injury prevention. It is week 5 of the NFL season, and we actually saw some pretty big names not even start the season this year.
Yeah.
I have a few of them here, and Dr. Nate and I actually talk about this a lot. We're big sports buffs. Dr. Dustin too, big sports buffs.
You
in
guys
this
are
office.
you guys are all over it though. Like between
Sam's more on it than I am. but
fantasy points,
guys.
line stats, like
I
what is the
really-
line, what's the over under? Like I enjoy sports, but holy cow, like yeah, you guys can have all that. Fill
Yeah,
me in.
me and sports, we're big into each other. But yeah, as our resident sports girl, I keep track of these kinds of things, and there were some big players this season that either didn't start or were out by game 2, and a few of those are Hollywood Brown with the Chiefs. He dislocated his shoulder before the season even started, had to have surgery. Probably isn't going to play
Can
regular
I say
season.
I love how the first two are our teams?
You're welcome. I did it on purpose. And then obviously Russell Wilson hasn't played for the Steelers because of a calf injury. There was Odell Beckham Jr., who was a free agent, went to the Dolphins, had a knee problem. He's actually suffered from multiple injuries over the last few years. So, and then obviously Cooper Kupp was one with an ankle injury. AJ Brown with the Eagles with a hamstring. Debo Samuel with a calf injury. Like Puka Nacua, Tua with a concussion. Jordan Love with a knee injury. Keenan Allen with a heel injury.
And one that everybody likes to talk about, and I know it's easy to skip over these, but Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Yeah, he hasn't played
Yeah.
this season.
And
Hasn't
won't
played at all.
until November.
Yep.
'Cause they pushed him back on the IR again, I guess.
Yeah, and then we've obviously the whole Chiefs wide receiver running back debacle that has happened. Rashee Rice, Isaiah Pacheco, those guys have also gone down with
Right.
injuries. And my question is some of these, especially like Dr. Nate and I just talked about this today. Like Hollywood Brown, a dislocated shoulder doesn't sound super serious, and media, like the fans, have been like, okay, well, why are you still there? It's like, what calf injury did he tear his calf? Is there why is that dislocated shoulder such a big deal? And it's not that serious. But in terms of these athletes receiving care, they're paid. They have these doctors. These teams have access to everything. But my question to you is, do they actually have access to the best care?
Well, before Dr. Nate probably jumps into this, I will. Here's what I do want to say is like, because you're right, you bring up a good point. It's like, oh, dislocated shoulder. Obviously, there's more going on. I think there's probably some things in here that they don't want to release or talk about. And at the end of the day, it's really none of our business, right? So the diagnoses that you see don't always tell the entire story. And I would say too, and kudos to them, like, I mean, don't lie to us, but you don't have to tell us the whole truth. Not as a fan base, obviously we're not their healthcare providers, but as a fan base and in society, like we don't need to know what are they getting divorced for? Or like we don't need to know all of the ins and outs. So just keep that in mind as a fan, because fan bases are super passionate.
Yeah.
But also too, keep that in mind with kids on your team. And if they don't want to divulge the whole story, like just know that there's a little respect that has to go into that as well.
Yeah. And we probably get into this a little bit later at the end, but there's also the mental component of that on what's going on in your life and how that is affecting the way that you're recovering from an injury. So that mental component, which we get into a lot with different topics, is also key. And they don't always talk about that side of things with, especially a lot of these professional athletes. But for Sam's question on like, are they getting the best care and that kind of thing? One, from a monetary standpoint, yes, they can afford anybody that they want from a healthcare standpoint. So, but does that mean that they're actually going to those people that can provide the best care? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes there might be the pressure of using the team doctors and whoever's affiliated with the organization. And just because you're affiliated with an organization doesn't mean that you are the best in the field. Some organizations, it's because that doctor paid to be the team doctor. Other times it is actually, okay, you are the best in that area, so we are going to bring you on as our team doctor. So it's yes and no, and it's different based on each team and each organization. But just because you're a professional athlete does not mean that you are actually receiving the best possible care out there. So, and there's, like I said, a lot of different factors that play into that. So, for example, having a dislocated shoulder or a calf injury, was that the first time that they've been dealing with that injury? Is it something that's been going on for a long time? So the difference between an acute injury, subacute, and even a chronic injury. So just to take the calf example, is an acute injury shouldn't take really that long to heal up.
Yeah.
If it's been something that's like been occurring over and over and over again over the course of months or years, then we're looking at more of the degenerative side of things, where that tissue, instead of being inflammatory, there might be some of that, but it's more the tissue's started to degenerate and weaken from that standpoint. So are they targeting it as an acute injury and treating it that way, or are they targeting it as a chronic injury that's just flared up? Because those are two totally different pathways on how you would treat it. So even just that route, and how much time they have, how much they're trying to get them back quick so that they can compete. It is their job. What are they doing in the off season for recovery? That's huge too. So all of that plays into that. And so to answer your question again, is I would say no, they are not receiving the best care abroad, all encompassing, that they could possibly be receiving.
Yeah. To talk about the mental part of that, like Odell Beckham Jr., who I said has been suffering from chronic knee injuries. He had a shattered ankle a couple of years ago, and he has been on record saying this past year, like, my son is 2. I haven't got to spend any time with him. So he was like, I felt a little bit late in going into free agency, and then I got this injury. And so he was like, I had a lot of other things going on in my life that needed my like prioritization. So I thought that was really cool that even as someone is in the spotlight as OBJ, to come out and be like, I had a lot of other things going on, was cool too. So Dr. Nate, have you worked in professional sports, if I remember correctly, or am I
I've worked with
misremembering?
professional athletes,
Okay.
and then I've done a lot with a lot of college teams. But being like the team chiropractor for a professional sport, no. Being a team chiropractor for collegiate sports, yes. Being the chiropractor for former and current professional athletes, yes, as well.
Cool. So you kind of know it firsthand.
And I've had the conversations too with the professional athletes, asking, when you have this type of injury, what do they do? And a lot of them are saying, not what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm coming to you. Or they're like, you'd be surprised what they're doing, or what they're telling you to do, or making you do, in a sense, because you're under contract to stay on the field.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm not gonna use names, but obviously I just got a pretty cool text not 20 minutes ago from professional and professional athletes, and also had a conversation earlier this summer with a local Blues hockey player who engaged me in conversation. I'm not a real starstruck person. We happened to like literally spin the corner and like run into each other, and I almost said his name, but I was like, hey, and he's like, hey man, what's going on? I was like, yeah, we just started talking, and he's like, and I just asked him a question, and he engaged me in the chiropractic side, and what else do you do? Like almost as if he's like, I want to know if I fit in your mold, and because they do have access and they do have the means for the greatest care in the world. What we're not saying is that they're never getting the best care. It's that sometimes, depending on the scenario, there's perspective differences with each different healthcare provider and way you want to go about it. And in the professional sports world, I do think it's very heavy in one direction. And, there does have to be some sort of consistency and some sort of plan, and I understand that. However, we've got a lot of colleagues that see a lot of professional athletes when they have, like, NASCAR has chiropractors, right? NFL has chiropractors, and like you said, so don't think that they've got the best healthcare in the world. They have the means to acquire the best healthcare in the world, but some of that, and at the same time, it's like, how do you know unless you try somebody? They hire a doc to be on staff, and they're like, wow, and it's like, I don't even think we know how many times that might overturn compared, because there are some teams that are like, this is it, but there's also a little bit of a play of, like you said, and I'm just going to be honest and just be bold and say it, like a lot of these doctors sign up for that so they can use it as a marketing aspect to be able to see these younger athletes to build a clientele. So you got to kind of be careful with that. But I do believe that, most doctors out there are out to help do good and fix the problem at hand. It's just perspectives could be different and means and modes could be different.
Yeah, docs that I know that have been working with professional teams, they have real good intentions, but they'll also say that they're limited in what they can do. So, for example, from a chiropractic standpoint, if you're a team chiropractor for a professional NFL team, that's what you're doing. You are being a chiropractor, adjusting and adjusting only. You're not doing soft tissue work. You're not taping. If you're a sports chiropractor with that background and that knowledge, you're not giving them exercises. You're not, so you're going there, you're adjusting them, and you're leaving. And if you try to do anything else for some of these organizations, they're going to kick you out, and they're bringing the next one in that will follow and stay in their lane. A lot of times it's the athletic trainers that are going to be the triage and say, you need to go see the chiropractor, you need to go to the ortho, whatever it might be. And when you have a great athletic trainer that will do that the right way, then yes, you can have access to the best healthcare being on a team like that.
And here's something you bring up too, and we could talk about this at nauseum, but you bring up a good point because we talk about this a lot, is you can have undoubtedly, unanimously, the best healthcare providers under one organization. Athletic trainer, surgeon, mental health, chiropractor, strength trainers, you could have undoubtedly the best. Everybody knows, like, yeah, that's the best. And still not receive the best healthcare underneath that organization. Why? We say it all the time. Because it's piecemealed.
Yep, exactly.
So unless you have everybody on board, and we're not doing this, and we're not playing the ego game, and because in our aspect, we're talking about professional sports, but let me remind you and bring this full circle. This is for student athletes and their parents trying to keep up. So let us reference that. And it's the same on our scale with where we're at, is you could have the best doctors in the world, and the guy that sees the Cardinals did my shoulder, and that's who we're going to have do my son's elbow. Like, totally get all that. But when these injuries and the recovery conversations need to happen, and nutrition and all these things, it's like we all have to be on the same page and not just piecemeal things together and put together a whole package of, do we need it all? Yes or no? If not, what do we need? And if we need it all, okay, how do we go about that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I would more rather do what I do now and see those athletes and professional athletes that want to be here, as opposed to me saying, oh yeah, I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers chiropractor, and I get to put that title on my resume. I would get frustrated because you'd be limited on, I was like, I know I can do more, and I know I can help you more, but they're only allowing me to do this.
You'd have black and gold handcuffs on.
Exactly, which might be cool. But to bring this back into the recovery realm of things, one last thing I wanted to touch on was kind of some of what the old versus what the new is. And a lot of people have heard of RICE, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And a lot of people still follow that. And a lot of doctors in the field, whether it's a chiropractor, MD, whoever it might be, still recommend that kind of thing. But we want to be a little bit more up to date with what's going on. And one of the more common ones, or more recent ones that you'll see nowadays, is what we call peace and love. And then there's also MEAT. And just to tell you what each of those letters and those acronyms stand for in terms of acute injuries and recovery. For peace and love, it's protect, elevate, avoid anti-inflammatory medications and ice. Compression, educate, load, optimism, vascularization, exercise. And then for MEAT, it's movement, exercise, analgesia, and treatment. So that's kind of what we want to be doing now for acute injuries, as opposed to the rest, ice, compression, and elevate. More of the research shows a lot of those other things, and we could even do a whole podcast on just that acronym alone. But there is one thing that I think is missing from that with dealing with acute injuries and recovery, and I think that would be the nutrition component. So I don't know where you would fit an N in there, but maybe Dr. Dustin can talk a little bit more on why that's such an important piece too in recovery.
We could put it at the end of love, but loving. Yeah, give yourself some loving. I do like how this is developing and what it is they're saying, because I'll spare my soapbox and just answer your question, because there's definitely some things in those acronyms I like and that people need to hear again. But on the nutrition side, it's very important to consider, again, the age range we're talking about. Most often, and what we are targeting is the kids who are still in their developmental stages, and in puberty, through puberty, which is, I mentioned a little bit before, of the hormones and the cascades that are happening during that time. We're not talking about attitudes and things like that. We're talking about literal body growth, enhancement, development physically, right? And how you fuel that is very important, because let's face it, what's most common in these kids' diets nowadays?
Processed foods is one of them.
Processed foods. Come on, Sam. You can jump on the mic.
Sugars,
Yes.
dyes, processed foods,
Yes.
preservatives.
Yes. So all of
Different
these
kinds of
things.
oils.
Yeah.
Oils, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So, but the sugar's a big conversation, the preservatives, because it has a negative intention on the soft tissues, on the gut. Now we're talking gut-brain connection and increasing inflammation by way of what you're eating or not eating. And then you have an injury, and now you're increasing other and it's just an ever-growing cascade. So on the nutrition side, there's a couple things to take into account. What age are we talking about? What sport do they play? Within that sport, what position are they playing? And you have to know the whole day in the life of that athlete, okay? I talked about this with that softball team who was here last night, and I said, have you ever thought about it this way? I said, all of you ladies in here on a softball team, do you think you would need to eat the same or different as you're going into districts? It's like you and cross country are going into districts together. Do you think you would need to eat the same or different to prepare, perform, and recover than a cross country athlete? And they're like, different? And I said, why? I said, they're two different sports. It's like, exactly. And I said, could you also believe that in a running sport, depending on how long you're running, the nutrition might look different from sprint to half marathon to full marathon to Ironman? And they're like, well, yeah. I was like, so what's different than you guys plug in any sport you want to talk about? I'll stick with the softball example of, does it make sense that a catcher would need to eat different than an infielder that would need to eat different than an outfielder? I'm not talking vastly, but it's like, how much ground is an outfielder covering every game versus an infielder who's pretty much in a box? Yeah, you might dive in the hole and go across the back, but by and large, and then what are catchers doing? Up and down, squat, that looks different.
Yeah.
On the recovery side, it's like, okay, how long was your game? How much did you play? It's very individualized. You can't go in and talk to a team and be like, this is what you all need to eat. These girls just had 9 games in 6 days.
That's a lot.
Wow. Right? So it's like, now take that into account a little differently. Do we have a game tomorrow? Do we have a double header tomorrow? Do we have a few days off? All of that takes into account. So there are some things that I can go over. Maybe we'll make some giveaways and we can put on the YouTube channel or however, and I can do some of those things. But for the sake of the podcast, our goal here is to give you some insight on not necessarily what to do, but to open your mind to ask better questions and get better answers, considering what it is your athlete needs. So during a time of injury, what are you supposed to eat? You go into higher protein and definitely staying away from sugars. Last thing you need to do is increase any false inflammation. Increasing good fats and protein is huge. The carbohydrates will fall where they fall, but let's get the fats and proteins in a situation that's going to help recover and rebuild whatever tissue it is, because sugar is used for fuel, where the proteins and the fats are used, yes, as fuel, but for developing tissue. What's muscle? Protein. It becomes very simple, but it can be very complex too, but it doesn't have to be. Consider who you're looking at, what sport you're playing, what position they play. Ask better questions, get better answers, because there's a lot of things, there's a lot of time you can cut down as far as during an injury. It's like, do you want to come back sooner or later? Ideally sooner.
Right.
Okay. This is a huge thing to take into account, is the nutrition side.
Yeah. I mean, you could even get into, which we won't today, but what's the injury? That can even determine, you want to be eating this, and this, like concussion versus ankle sprain. I mean, that's a totally different thing too.
Yeah.
So, that's such a big component. And
And like Sam was saying earlier too, I mean, going back to the Hollywood Brown thing and you bringing up that point is it's like, you know, what if it's the same injury, but how did it happen?
Yep.
You know, a quarterback dislocates his shoulder because maybe arm angle was wrong, arm got bumped, arm angle changed, boom, bang, okay. Or was it traumatic impact?
Yeah.
What else is involved in that whole complex?
Then you get the mental component of getting back into that same scenario, and you know, if it was an impact, and it's like, okay, is he a little softer now? Is he not going for the ball as much?
Yeah,
So,
the mental side is so huge.
Just talked about that with Joe Burrow today. Since he hurt his hand,
yeah,
he's
hasn't really
been playing differently because he needs his hand, and it was an impact injury, and that's hard to come back from, especially as a quarterback.
Right.
So a lot of great content. I think we could go on and on about a lot of these different topics we've gone to. So maybe what we'll do is pick and choose some of the things that we want to go in more detail and do some more podcasts based on that, whether it's the nutrition component, the mental side of things and the injuries, or like how to actually do proper recovery and get a lot more in detail on you need to be doing this, this, and this, and this. But Sam, give me your top tip that we went through today that you really gravitated towards.
I think my biggest one is listening to your body, because as a 28-year-old woman who stopped swimming a long time ago, I was very in tune with my body as an athlete, but now as someone who is getting back to the gym, lifting weights, and as an athlete in a different way, listening to my body has been a little bit hard for me. So being able to really find a way to get back in tune with that is super important, especially as, you know, our college kids, you know, move on from being athletes, or, you know, our high school, middle school kids are moving into being a different sort of athlete. Listening to your body and being in tune with it, and then finding somebody who can help you really understand what's going on with it if you don't understand is super, super important.
What about you? What was your favorite?
I like feeding off of things like that. Like I like trying to solve and bring perspective. Obviously, anybody who's watched, and for those of you that are new, you're going to hear me say perspective a lot. It's one of my favorite words, because Sam saying that just brings up another great point and tip, that it's like, it's okay to feel that way. And it's like, it's hard for me now. You know, I stopped swimming, 8, 10, 12 years ago, and now I want to lift weights and I want to get back into it. And I hear my body saying something. It's kind of like when you grow up, and I tell my kids all the time, I was like, I know you hear me, you're just not listening. So to hear your body say something, but not know how to listen to it, like that, I think as far as the tip or a topic that could be expounded on, that one's pretty good. And obviously it's in the forefront because she just said it, but that's a big deal.
Yeah. My biggest thing, which if you've listened to me before, is also just keeping up with what's current. And so the peace and love, as well as the meat versus the rice, I think we'll maybe create a podcast just based on that and go in depth in each one of those letters, and saying what you should be doing for each letter too. Give you a little bit more education and background on why you should be doing that, as opposed to the old mantra.
Yeah, there are definitely some words in there that I'm like, what's
I had trouble saying some of them. Vascularization.
Yeah, that was one. The A one is for me. I'm like, what is
analgesia?
Yeah, what is that? Well, you have to come back to learn what that is. So you have to tune in again.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, that's good. A lot of good stuff. Welcome back. Season 2.1 in the books. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And if you do have anything you want to talk about, leave us your favorite tips below. Make sure you like, subscribe, share this out. If there's anything else you would like us to talk about, just leave it in the comments. Or if there's any specific questions you have, we'd love to jump on and answer those for you, and or create a whole nother podcast on it if it needs it. So hope you guys have a great rest of your week. See ya.